Is adrenal fatigue real? You look at any natural health magazine, any social media around health, most websites with people who do integrative medicine, functional medicine, even nutrition, they're all going to be talking about adrenal fatigue, adrenal exhaustion, things like that. And there's a lot of focus in the assessment and treatment on the what we call adrenal fatigue, just around the adrenal glands. And I think obviously that's pretty good, a good start, but there's more to it. So I'm just going to walk you through kind of how your adrenal glands work and the systems that are peripheral to it, and show you some opportunities to investigate in your own health, whether or not you have adrenal fatigue, and more importantly, if you think you have it or somebody else has it, all of the different things you may have to address in order to actually resolve that situation. Some things are actually really easy, sometimes they're not. So here we go. The first thing you need to be aware of is that all of this starts in your head, literally in your brain. Your hypothalamus, which is a gland in your brain, tells your pituitary gland through a hormonal messenger to tell your adrenal glands to basically do more work. And when they get that message, they secrete what we call adrenaline, or norepinephrine and epinephrine, and then cortisol. And the norepinephrine, epinephrine, adrenal kind of hormones, they're very, very fast acting and very exciting. You know, they constrict our blood vessels and get us going in the typical fight or flight response. And cortisol is kind of like the slow moving stress hormone that, you know, lingers over hours and primarily keeps releasing blood sugar into the body so that we have the energy to continue the fight or flight process. So the hormones are kind of like the big gas pedal, the adrenal hormones. Short acting cortisol, kind of more like you can think of the gas in the car. It's going to just basically keep things running over time. So that's step one. So now that you have a sense that it's the HPA axis that actually keeps the adrenals under pressure, kind of like the gas pedal in your car, keeping the gas moving through your car, we're going to go into what happens next. We call this step 2 of understanding adrenal fatigue. So this is a description of what's called the general adaptive syndrome, which is purely common sense. So let's say life gets busy, got more bills, you know, you had twins instead of one kid, whatever the thing is that's causing you to have to be a bit more busy than you're used to. This is going to be what's called stage 1, which is the stage called arousal. And that just means you're doing the basic fight or flight thing longer than you have in the past, you know, for days, then weeks, then maybe months. And over that period of time, the amount of cortisol that you're going to secrete is going to go up. So this little graph here, this curve that we're looking at, is called a hormesis curve, and it just describes how just about every system in your body adapts, sometimes positively, sometimes not so positively, to stressors. Right now we're looking at basically cortisol. So if you were to take a lab test for the cortisol that you're producing every day, it would gradually look like it's going up and up and up. And at a certain point, it's going to pass the number 42, and that depends on the kind of lab testing you're doing, but we're going to call that the upper threshold. So now your cortisol levels have passed a healthy threshold in terms of that's a lot of cortisol. And it's going to keep going up and up and up as far as your genetic potential and your endurance and your constitution and you know, other factors, you know, in the sense of maybe you're invincible, maybe you're really, really like the canary in the mine shaft, and this doesn't go doesn't take very long at all. So at a certain point, your ability to produce more cortisol than you did the day before starts to run out. And that's true of everybody at some point. Any system in your body is finite, which means you can only do so much. So then if you were to keep taking your blood tests, your saliva tests around cortisol, you'd notice that your numbers are now dropping, right? Now this could be dropping because suddenly you, I don't know, inherited enough money to take care of your bills or something. Or more likely, the system behind producing cortisol is just wearing out more and more and more and more. And that's kind of the fatigue part. So stage 1 is arousal. Stage 2 is what we call an overstrain. So the word overstrain in medicine is a very specific, it has a very specific meaning, which is to use a tissue, an organ, a system, a hormone, until the point that it's strained itself, kind of like straining a muscle, and then you're using that system, that muscle again, before it's actually had the time to restore itself. You know, you go lift weights, you strain your arm, and then you keep lifting weights, you're probably going to end up with a sprain, right? So this overstrain process keeps looking like this. Now you can imagine if this is normal levels of cortisol, you're feeling more and more frazzled, you know, in the sense of what we call tired and wired, but the tired starts to outweigh the wired. And your numbers are going to keep going down, but more importantly, your sense of fatigue, your sense of concentration, how well you sleep, how well you recover from exercise, your libido, your mood. A lot of people who are actually treated for depression are just experiencing generally a sense of overall exhaustion. So this keeps going down here, and now you're going to start passing this lower threshold in the lab works, lab tests I use. That's going to be below 23. But what's more importantly is you've passed the low threshold for health, and that's not a good thing. Now, stage 3 is what we call adaptive resistance, which means now your body is going to start borrowing from your thyroid, doing more damage to your serotonin, probably borrowing, as we'll see, certain tissue from other hormones to keep the cortisol going. And what you would see in terms of lab tests is, you're above the low threshold. So some doctors would say, you're actually okay. 2 months later, you come in, oh my God, it's pretty low, but it's not really low. It's just low. So let's do something about that. Take a weekend off or whatever. And then people will often go through this process. I would say the average I've seen is between 10 and 15 years of basically bumping around in and out of stage 3, adaptive resistance, aging more rapidly, doing probably some actual tissue harm to your brain, not to mention the wear and tear on your soul and your adaptive physiology with respect to the rest of your body. So it actually astounds me as a human being how adaptable our species is, in the sense that we can misuse ourselves for that long and aging ourselves that much, just out of being stubborn and perhaps even unaware that we're actually getting that sick. And that can happen too. So we've got our arousal stage, our overstrain stage, and now we've got this resistance stage where your adaptability is struggling in every way possible to just keep it going. Because as far as your your hormonal physiology is concerned, the person in charge probably knows what they're doing, so we're going to keep at it, fight the good fight. So then we hit stage number 4, and that's what we call adaptive exhaustion, or in this case, adrenal fatigue or adrenal exhaustion. And at this point, you just rapidly can no longer produce enough cortisol. You've borrowed from every other possible tissue bank account that you may have, and now it's going really, really low. And this typically starts to look like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, full-blown chronic complex autoimmune conditions, and things like that. And getting out of this situation might take you 3 to 6 months, getting out of stage 3. Getting out of stage 4 is going to be an average of 2 years. And you really need to be working with someone who can take, consistent lab testing to make sure where your numbers are at. And more importantly, I think around lab testing is blood tests are only going to really give you a sense of your daily sum of cortisol. And that can be a problem, and I'll show you why really quickly. So you're coming in at 30, right? And you're just looking at your daily sum. You could be in stage 1 or stage 2, and nobody knows how to know. Whereas if you're doing the cortisol tests, where we take 4 tests throughout a 24-hour period, then we're given a much more clear sense of where your entire adaptive physiology is around how your body secretes hormone, your cortisol hormone throughout the day. And if you can do that, you can discern much more quickly where you are on this entire spectrum of potential states of adrenal health. So that's step 2. We know the HPA axis is involved, and it's kind of like the gas pedal. If you keep the gas pedal on too long, you're inevitably going to go through this adaptive process to the point where you're going to be in one of these stages, and the farther you go, the longer it takes to get better. So let's look at step 3.